big kiss.
I'm good, thank you.
Good morning. You know, when I was invited to do a little spiel on Fox Television last night, I said to myself, there really is no competition between Fox News and the Nutritional Therapy Association. So, in any event, here I am, and it's a pleasure to be with you. You know, I've looked at your very stellar list of speakers, and I'm most impressed that you've probably been enjoying the links between sugar and your health, sugar and the foods in our diet, sugar and the politics that abound in our country, as well as sugar and lifestyle changes. Well, I found a very interesting connection between sugar and certain other aspects of lifestyle that have to do with electropollution. And so there are two new words that I'm going to have you really focus on. You'll see them come up in my slide presentation. The first is dirty electricity, which has been connected to a different kind of diabetes, which is known as type 3 diabetes. Now, the research is emerging research. I talk about this in my book, Zapped, but in the years to come, you are going to be seeing some very interesting connections being made between the electromagnetic environment and the inability to balance blood sugar levels effectively. And this may have something to do with the increase in type 2 diabetes. It will certainly help to moderate those that are on insulin as far as the type 1 diabetics are concerned. And then, of course, there is the type 3 diabetic, who is the individual who is extremely sensitive to the electromagnetic fields that now surround us 24/7, whether we're in our cars, our homes, our businesses, or our schools. And so without further ado, let me then make all of those connections for you a little bit more clearly in your home, your health, how to make a supernatural sanctuary for optimal healing and blood sugar balance. A house blessing. You know, 10 years ago, upon the completion of my newly built home in northern Idaho, I was presented with a book entitled A House Blessing. Now, to bless, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is to consecrate by conferring well-being upon. And as one of the pages in this book so beautifully illustrates, let your home be a place of peace. It should offer refuge from the chaos and doubt of the outside world and manifest in its orderliness a model for the larger world. And it's looking like your home is one of the only safe havens to protect you from the electromagnetic sea that is abounding 24/7, that has cumulative and chronic effects. And so when you take a look at the body, I like to think of the body's three skins. That was an analogy that was first developed by the building biologists who had a movement that began in Germany and was established here in North America in about 1987. Well, this is a very elegant and, to me, very central analogy about the human environment and how intertwined we all are in terms of the body's skin, the second skin being your clothing, and the third skin being the dwelling. So simply put, people, their clothing, and their homes should be viewed as a single organism because we are all in organic harmony for proper health and well-being. The problem, as I see it, is that there are hidden saboteurs that reside in everyday homes in this day and age. And this afternoon, what I'd like to do is tell you in a little bit more detail about the environmental toxins that are going to be surrounding us, the toxins that go in us, and the toxins that go on us, and the very best ways in which you can remedy these situations. You're going to be learning how to improve the quality of the electroclimate, the EMFs that can be impacting blood sugar. You'll learn about improving indoor air quality and how to emit all those man-made frequencies that are now being emitted from all of our smart technologies, whether it's the compact fluorescent phones or compact fluorescent lights, your compact fluorescent phones, your iPhones that can do just about everything but the dishes these days, and the smart meters that are now posing an enormous threat throughout the country because of the consistent pulsing radiation that is affecting everybody throughout the nation. So I'd suggest that it's high time that we go from green to pristine. And so here we have the toxic invader that's the focus of my new book, and that is electropollution. And I think it's truly one of the most overlooked areas in the home environment. And it ranks like other indoor pollutants. This is very similar, ladies and gentlemen, to heavy metals, very similar to chemicals, to radon, to carbon monoxide, to molds, to mildew. But the problem with electropollution is that we can't see it, we can't smell it, and we can't taste it. Yet it abounds at about 100 million times more than what was surrounding our parents or our grandparents. So if you take a look at this partial list of the biochemical effects, I think you'll see that one of the primary effects has to do with blood sugar regulation. And what the research seems to suggest is that changes in blood sugar become very obvious when we start measuring individuals in a very high EMF environment. And what we see in a high EMF environment is that very many times that blood sugar can deviate as much as 30 to 40 to 50 points, depending upon the nature of the environment. There are individuals that can go out and go for a walk and then decrease their blood sugar accordingly. They come back into their electromagnetically hyped house and take that same walk on a treadmill, which is an electrical device, and their blood sugar soars by another 30 to 40 or 50 points. And all this has been well researched by Magda Havas, who is a Canadian researcher in Canada. You'll see several of her resources and sources in the back. Well, some of the other real toxic elements that we need to be concerned about in terms of this latest layer of pollution has to do with the assault that is generated from everything in your environment, from power lines, from the wiring in these walls, to the cell phones that we all use, to the cordless phones, those smart meters that are now rolling out throughout the country, and even common appliances like your microwave ovens, your radios, and your televisions. Now, personally, I became very interested in the topic, which resulted in the publication of my new book, Zapped, when I learned myself that I was an electro-hypersensitive. Another new term you're going to be learning about besides that of dirty electricity and type 3 diabetes. You'll hear the word electro-hypersensitivity. You see, we're like canaries in the coal mine. And in my case, I developed this funny lump or mass that was right under my jaw that kept growing for about, I'd say it was about 3 years. Finally, I said to myself, I think it's time to get this little growth out. It looked as if it could have been a lymph node, which I was in absolute denial about. Found a surgeon that I trusted, went in, had the darn thing removed, and I said, "What is this?" And he said to me, "Well, it's something I've never seen before." The year was 2005. It happens to be a parotid gland tumor. Thankfully, it was a benign parotid gland tumor. I learned when I was doing the research of Zapped that benign and malignant parotid gland tumors are very prevalent with individuals who use their cell phones against one side of their head for several hours a day. They're 50% more likely to develop these salivary tumors, just like mine. So more definitive research came out in 2011, and thankfully to the American Journal of Epidemiology, we are now seeing that there is a greater increase in these rather benign and sometimes even malignant tumors because of the prolific use day and night of cell phones. Now you see, I was a cell phone addict. You've heard of sugar addicts, am I correct? Well, it's much more difficult to get off of your cell phone than to get off sugar, let me just tell you that. And so I was conducting business morning, noon, and night, 27 or 24/7, wherever I was, on my cell phone, not realizing that this little microwave oven with pulsating radiation, which was completely different than anything my body knew how to respond to normally, was affecting my brain, affecting my heart, affecting my DNA, and making all kinds of brain-blood barrier leaks, as well as allowing my system to start losing calcium from the cell membranes. I also started to learn that I wasn't the only one that was evidencing these very weird symptoms that were related to unmitigating cell phone usage. There were basketball stars like LeBron James that I read about, who actually had a benign parotid gland tumor. And then Robert Ebert, the prize-winning movie critic, as well as John McCain, also had their malignant parotid gland tumor growths removed. So this is becoming extremely prevalent. And although it's still a very controversial area of research, in individuals who've used cell phones for more than about 10 years, or a cumulative amount of 1,460 hours to be exact, those are the individuals that usually have more of a predisposition to developing the kind of brain tumors that can be very malignant. Now, there are cumulative and chronic effects from the use of all of this electrical stuff and digital stuff in the environment. None of it has been vetted for long-term chronic or cumulative use. And if you can remember back, the first year that all of this came out was in 1984. 1984 was also the year in which yuppie flu was first diagnosed. 1984 was the year that the cell phone network went nationwide, and it was also the year that these strange symptoms of chronic fatigue started to come up out of the woodwork, so to speak. Well, one of the symptoms of electromagnetic sensitivity is chronic cell phone use, and one of the symptoms happens to be chronic fatigue, for which no amount of rest can really remediate. And so I'm here to say that we have been surrounded by this technology, which is so entwined in our souls, in the way that we do work, that to tell you it was at all harmful or dangerous is like telling you that your shoes are going to kill you. And so I've had to be very careful about how I approach the topic. But what I do want to tell you is that there are chronic and cumulative effects. The previous slide certainly showed that in terms of the EMR biological effects. And all of this has been written about in peer-reviewed journals, highly respected journals. The problem is it's recognized but not well publicized, because we have over 20 telecommunications companies in this country that are making over $2 trillion. And so when you talk about money leading the way and money perverting science, I think you should also understand that the majority of science that is out there is that which is funded by the cell phone companies. So what we know is that electropollution can scramble cellular communication. It can decalcify the cell membrane. It shuts down your ability to detoxify and to take in nutrients. And it also impacts neurotransmitters. Other effects that are linked to radio frequency exposure, from many of these devices, from the towers and from your PDAs and from the iPhones, maybe even the cordless phones, have found to have major changes in brain function, as well as a higher risk in the development of brain cancer, due primarily to the zapping of melatonin levels, as well as an increase in degenerative diseases. And much of this has been coordinated and corroborated with metabolic syndrome, ADD, ADHD, asthma, fibromyalgia, as well as diabetes. So according to Martin Blank, who is the former associate professor of physiology and cellular biophysics in Columbia, or at Columbia University, the element here that we have to understand is that when you're exposed to this electromagnetic energy, your body promotes cellular stress proteins, and those proteins then interrupt or irritate the central nervous system, which in fact puts you on sympathetic dominant. When you're on sympathetic dominant, the body continually produces cortisol, ups and downs and downs and ups, and has a great deal to do with aging, has a great deal to do with anti-aging. The way in which to stop anti-aging is the importance of stopping this perverse effect that we have from these devices, and it has an awful lot to do with the obesity or diabesity epidemic that we're seeing today. According to one of the individuals that I was able to interview, we're all guinea pigs, because the long-term impact of electromagnetics, similar to long-term HRT, similar to asbestos, similar to Agent Orange, or even smoking. None of that has been studied nor understood because there's too much money to be made. So here we go back to diabetes and electropollution. So this is what I wanted to bring to your attention. Remember I said there was a new word in the vernacular that I thought you should become familiar with, type 3 diabetes. Well, type 1, as you know, is the juvenile onset diabetes, which of course affects children. Type 2, adult onset, which is now an absolute epidemic in this day and time, can also impact women who are pregnant. And then there's the environmental impact, which is a risk of diabetes that is almost induced or exacerbated by exposure to electromagnetic energies in the environment. And here's where this other term comes into play. This is the dirty electricity you'll hear tell about. It's simply described as high-frequency transients and harmonics that are on electronic waves. And this type of radio frequency can actually hitchhike into your home on the wires and run amok of those wires due to the fact that the electric company's neutral wire, which is supposed to carry spent power back to the substation, is unable to do so because the load is too high. Dirty electricity can be induced inside the building because of all of the electronic equipment. So you think about computers, think about dimmer switches, think about fax machines, think about copiers, energy-efficient lighting, entertainment units with switching devices and transformers. From the outside, it can come in through the electrical wires or through ground rods or plumbing. It can also enter buildings through the power lines from your neighbor's property. Now, it's measured by using a micrometer. It's called a microsurge meter, and I wanted to go around the room and actually measure what was going on in this room today. And so this is what my little meter looks like. It's a microsurge meter. You see, it's very easy to operate because it shows numbers. It shows numbers. If the reading is more than 50, it's undesirable. 25 to 50, average. Less than 25, good. Right in this arena where there are a lot of electrical wires, we've got the computer on stage, we've got my microphone, you've got a lot of things that are plugged in here. The dirty electricity was measuring 250. That's nothing. That's actually pretty low. I thought it was going to be about 700, 500, 700. When I used my handy dandy, and I travel with these, you should see my room upstairs, my bedroom upstairs here in the hotel. This is a filter. It's a capacitor that filters out the dirty electricity. When I put this in that same socket that measured so highly, this reduced it to about 100, which meant that it wasn't completely safe, but it certainly decreased it by over 50%. Now, a normal home needs 20 to 40 of these little devices. And the studies show, and this is what's so fascinating, this is why I wanted to come to you and open up your minds to this. The studies show that individuals who have type 2 diabetes and are particularly electromagnetically sensitive, so they've got the type 3 overlay on the type 2, as well as those that are taking insulin, can oftentimes reduce their insulin substantially with just the use of these little filters throughout the home. And what we're finding with this is that there's a big connection between the degree of dirty electricity in the home environment and MS. And individuals who have gone into their homes and have had them remediated and gotten rid of the MS, or gotten rid of, I should say, the dirty electricity through many of these little filters, their MS symptoms have improved majorly to the extent that individuals can now walk, their balance is better, and they're able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So there's a major electromagnetic effect to the body, because let's not forget that your body is an electrical being. Your heart is an electrical organ, and it's run by the greatest electrical computer of all, and that's known as your brain. So I'd mentioned the name Dr. Magda Havas. It's a name that I'd like you to keep in mind as well with the dirty electricity, type 3 diabetes. She's the individual at Trent University who has published the results of many of these studies. And many of them you can look up online because she's published them in electromagnetic biology and medicine. So clearly, this area of type 3 diabetes and electropollution is an area for a lot more investigation. As one of the authors of a new book called Dirty Electricity wrote, historical evidence that electrification caused the 20th century epidemic of disease of civilization. He says that most of the disease of civilization, including cancer, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes, are caused by electromagnetic frequency exposure. So how do you like that? Some of the causes and sources of dirty electricity, as I mentioned before, you'll see them in terms of your computers, which we all have, particularly if they're computers that are plugged in. Your television sets, primarily the plasma television sets. Your dimmer switches, power tools, neighbors, even loose wires or tree branches touching power lines can affect all of the dirty electricity. When I had my home mitigated for dirty electricity, I had an electrician that came in and said this is the cleanest house he'd ever measured. And that was when I started to sleep through the night. So by some estimates, and I'll repeat this again because it's worth repeating, we are exposed daily to as much as 100 million times more of these electromagnetic radiation waves than our grandparents were. And these are not normal natural waves that you get from the sun or from lightning strikes. These are electromagnetic radiation waves that are very low in frequency, but nonetheless, they have strange pulsating patterns, strange signaling patterns, and they have strange waveforms that your body goes into immediate lockdown with. This is a very stressful assault on your system like any other toxic element. Now let's take a quick visual inventory, if you will, and I talk about this in a lot more detail in my book where I practice electronic feng shui. And if you go and look at what went on in your grandparents' or even your parents' home at this point, think about all of the electrical equipment that they may have had. Well, if I close my eyes, I can think of about 15 or so that my grandmother had. If she was using a blender or even a can opener or a toaster, she would plug the contraption in and then plug it out. They knew something we didn't know intuitively. So the total inventory of what your parents' or grandparents' home may have had electrically was pretty much between 15, maybe 20, or even less. If you fast forward to 2012 and take a look at what you have in your own homes, I'm sure you can see that we are loaded with electronic, and digital gadgets. And the trouble is that we are so exquisitely sensitive in terms of bioelectrical magnetics that, again, our cells react like this was a harmful environmental toxins. The DNA strands are going to break, which cells respond to by creating stress proteins. The cell itself goes into cellular lockdown mode, where nutrients can't get in and toxins can't get out, and calcium is either being lost by the cellular membrane, and when that happens, neurotransmitters get scrambled. It's also felt that when you are exposed day in and day out to any kind of wireless overload, that your sympathetic nervous system becomes on red alert, as I mentioned previously, and that leads to adrenal and thyroid burnout. So, oh my. Our body is not only driven by biochemistry, but it certainly is driven by electricity. And of course, that most obviously includes the way in which your entire body works as the body electric. And it includes the 500 trillion synapses contained in that mainframe computer, the biggest computer of them all, which again is the brain. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and I have to tell you this. In the presence of electromagnetic radiation, neurotoxins generated by molds increased a good 600 times. And this is according to a study from one of my EMR buddies, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, who is in this area, I believe. He's in the state of Washington. While exposure to toxic molds produce staggering health effects because of the mycotoxins that they produce. Now, exposure to molds can create an enormous who's who of health effects. So you'll take a look that blood sugar abnormalities are one of the key health effects that is a result of some of the mold's mycotoxin production. And you'll also take a look at the chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia that are part of the mold's problems there. Researchers at the Mayo Clinic believe that 90% of all chronic sinusitis is due to an immune response from fungus. And as many of you know, fungus can be fed dietarily from one particular nutrient, which is sugar. So one of the ways in which you can stop making your home a toxic waste dump is to make sure that your own body becomes a fortress. And you want to make sure that your sugar consumption, as you now know by now, you're on the third day of your lovely conference, needs to be mitigated, and you need to make the proper kinds of adaptations and swaps accordingly. And so anytime your system goes on overload, very oftentimes mold or fungus or even yeast will grow. And I think what's important to understand here is that in the home itself, you can be very susceptible to immunosuppressing illness if, in fact, there's too much moisture in the home environment. So anytime that relative humidity goes over 40%, mold spores start to grow. And in terms of my mold resources, there are some very mold knowledgeable doctors. I love themolddoctor.com, and there are lots of mold health studies that I think will be very interesting for those of you that want to make sure that your own home is a supernatural sanctuary for optimal health and healing. Then there are the chemicals. Now, the EPA tells us that indoor air levels of many pollutants may be about 100 times more concentrated in the indoors than the outdoors. And I think many of you are aware of this. But now, since so many of us spend at least 90% of our time indoors, we're unknowingly surrounded by radon, molds, mildew, and electromagnetic and radio frequency pollution. So environmental degradation is just not an outdoor event, it's now indoors. You don't have to leave home to find it. We know that asthma is now the #1 chronic childhood disease, and interestingly enough, it's been linked to common indoor chemicals which are associated with either new paint, new flooring, a new carpet, new furniture, or new wallpaper. There are many, many suspected endocrine disrupting chemicals that are showing up in the bloodstream of children, newborns, and adults. And that's coming from all the flame retardants on furniture to the flexible phthalates found in fresheners, perfumes, shower curtains, plastics, and even cosmetics. So an EPA study recently found that any antibacterial that is used widely in deodorants, in soaps, and in toothpastes has hormonal effects and will kill human cells and make you much more susceptible to blood sugar dysregulation. We also know that turning on your faucet can be risky. Perchlorate is mainly a rocket fuel component that inhibits the production of iodine reuptake in the thyroid. It may be contributing to problems in terms of weight gain, as well as fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And it's currently found in about 32 of our states. Chemicals equal obesogens, which also equal diabesity. So you'll note that there's a new term for certain chemicals in this day and time. They're known as obesogens. Not only do they make us sick, but they are promoting obesity. And these obesogens are linked to everyday chemicals, especially the one that is the most prolific in the environment. It's the bisphenol A, which we now know is very much linked to diabetes and metabolic syndrome. You know, back in 2004, Bruce Blumberg coined the term, which has now been extended to many indoor disruptors in the environment. And we find that between the years 1930 and 2000, the number of synthetic chemicals in use skyrocketed. And when that happened, so did the number of overweight individuals in our country. Mostly, we now believe, due to the endocrine disruptors that are so prevalent in the environment. So I'd say we've got 58 million people in the United States that are overweight. We've got 40 million that are obese, and about 3 million that are morbidly obese. Somehow or another, we are approaching a global pandemic, and worldwide obesity has more than doubled since 1980. Couldn't it be the uptick in the electromagnetic pollution that is invading our homes, our schools, our businesses, our colleges? Couldn't it also be the enormous amount of chemicals that we're now finding in 100% of all of us? So we are now the United States of diabetes. So the hidden epidemic of diabetes affects nearly 2 billion people around the world. And it is suggested that by 2020, 90% of whom may not be diagnosed properly but will be affected. That's about 50% of all Americans by 2020 that will be affected. I think what's interesting to note is that bisphenol A, more so than any other obesogen, is in the blood and the urine of every single one of us, as I mentioned before. And it has become exceedingly widespread since the 1950s, when it's been used in baby bottles, it's been used in toys, in water bottles, in jugs, and even the lining of food and beverages. Now, it's been known for years to be an endocrine disruptor because it increases estradiol, which is believed to hinder glucose metabolism. So now, besides the enormous amount of sugar that is hidden in all of our foods, we've got these chemicals that are acting as obesogen agents and contributing to the diabesity epidemic. And my gosh, they've been found everywhere. I think this is taking an exceedingly toxic toll on our body. I believe that if you just take a look at a normal inventory of just a few of the human diseases, you'll see that they're dramatically on the rise as we surround ourselves with more electronics, more digital devices, more mycotoxins from molds, as well as more chemicals. So when toxins can't be broken down and eliminated, they just travel through your body. If they go to the brain, they may be creating migraines or premature brain aging and memory loss. If they go to your heart, well, then they can create problems with blood pressure challenges. If they invade the pancreas, perhaps blood sugar abnormalities. In the eyes, your vision goes. In the stomach, unresolved nausea and indigestion. So they act as primary hormone disruptors, which can also reduce libido. They increase estrogen dominance, which interferes with weight loss. That impacts glucose metabolism and then opens the way to blood sugar dysfunction. I believe that environmental illness, however, is not your fault. I think the petrochemical revolution has placed an enormous burden on our systems, and particularly the body's #1 detox filter, which is the liver, that quite frankly was absolutely never designed to break down the sheer number of chemicals, drugs, formaldehyde glues, sprays, neurotoxins, cements, anaerobic bacteria, heavy metals, molds, prescription drugs, and over-the-counter meds that we ingest in this day and time. And probably even more insidious is the fact that some of us genetically can't break down or eliminate toxins. We can't break down chemicals or heavy metals, especially copper, because of a genetic defect known as the MTHFR enzyme gene. Are you familiar with the MTHFR enzyme gene, ladies and gentlemen? Well, basically speaking, this enzyme defect impairs the body's ability to make glutathione, which is the main water-soluble antioxidant, which is essential for the liver to use for detoxification. It also acts within the nerves in the brain. When you take the MTHFR test, you will note that almost 50% of the population has the defect. I am one of those lucky 50%. I, the individual who writes about detoxification, do not have the genetic ability to detoxify properly because I cannot make glutathione due to a genetically predisposed problem down the line in the metabolic circuitry, which affects vitamin B12. So, having said that, For the other half of the individuals who are not glutathione impaired, their bodies can better respond to toxins if they have a good functioning liver. And you'll see in terms of the liver being your lifeline, this is a very nutrient-dependent kind of detoxification. There are two various pathways that are used for detoxification, and phase 1 needs a whole variety of nutrients, as does phase 2 in terms of varieties of antioxidants and amino acids to do its job properly. So if any of these are missing or are lacking, then the body simply does not detoxify the chemicals, the molds, the heavy metals, nor does it have the ability to withstand the EMR invasion if the liver is not functioning at optimum capacity. Of course, getting off of trans fats, sugars of all kind, including artificial sweeteners, because I know you now know about those, as well as alcohol, the pill, sugar, and Tylenol are absolutely essential. So I believe in eating, and eating to make that body a strong fortress, to withstand all of these assaults that are coming left and right 24/7 in your home and in your businesses. And that's one of the reasons I created a liver loving food list, because I believe on a daily basis, taking a little bit from the citrus family, from your sulfur-rich foods, whether that's a little garlic that you're going to use as seasoning, some liver healers, particularly for this time of the year, which is liver season, March 21st to June 21st, as well as your green leafy veggies, and your cruciferous veggies are probably your best friend in warding off the inability to detoxify and to nourish and to nurture your liver. You know, we wax poetic about the heart, but the liver is where the action is. Of all of the nutrients one can take for the liver, my very favorite is one that is not given a lot of play, and that is taurine. I think it's an unsung hero, as a matter of fact, but it's the most efficient amino acid when I do my testing, and I use a lot of foundational medicine testing. I use all kinds of labs throughout the country, but have found that testing for amino acids is extremely important in terms of being able to detoxify. So taurine, more than anything else, I mean, you can talk about milk thistle till you're blue in the face. Half of my clients who are very chemically sensitive do not utilize milk thistle properly. You've got your dandelion root, your Oregon grapefruit, a very high source of berberine, a very good nutrient for diabetics, and black radish. But none of them, as far as I'm concerned, truly do hold that candle to taurine, which is exceedingly important for the removal of toxic chemicals and metabolites, at least 500 to 3,000 milligrams a day, and this should be taken between meals. If we take a visit to glutathione, the premier toxic waste eliminator, I think what you're going to see is that glutathione is the key to complete detoxification. And as our lovely little slide says, it becomes easily drained from all of the home environment assaults, whether it's EMRs, electromagnetic radiation, molds, or chemicals. Now, a continuous supply of this stuff is very important to neutralize all kinds of toxins, including drugs and over-the-counter meds, especially Tylenol. Now, it's interesting to note that in people with diminished ability to detoxify, we find that serious diseases come home to roost. Now, glutathione works very well with alpha-lipoic acid, and these two are kind of like a double whammy. And I think if you're interested in eliminating toxic waste, at least 250 milligrams of a glutathione substance or a precursor, plus anywhere from 100 to 300 alpha-lipoic acid a day will be very important in terms of crossing the water and lipid-permeable cell membranes so that the glutathione can do its antioxidant magic anywhere in the body. It's also important to note that glutathione is in itself a potent blood sugar regulator and very important to bring down elevated liver enzymes as well as to act as part of the triple therapy against hepatitis C. So alpha-lipoic acid, extremely important in terms of blood sugar. Now, to get the glutathione you need, you've got to eat the most prolific food source, which is what vegetable, ladies and gentlemen? Asparagus. Asparagus is the #1 vegetable that contains ready-to-use glutathione. Whey protein is a marvelous source of the sulfur-bearing amino acids that act as precursors to glutathione. And then for those of us that need even a little bit more help from our friends, you've got your glutathione suppositories, which are used over the counter in terms of those that have a coffee enema connection to them. But there are also prescription suppositories that you can get from a compounding pharmacist, where you can get anywhere from 300 to 400 milligrams per suppository. So these are the best food sources that will give you the glutathione you need to do the job of detoxification and make your environment inside and out as healthy as possible. Now, if you suspect that you're not detoxifying normally, or if you've got a client or a patient that isn't, I think it's imperative that they do this little test, this MTHFR test, which is available in Bothell, Washington for about $145, as I recall. You'll see 2 genetic variants in this particular test and on the results, and if you've got one of them, then you simply substitute or supplement with more folic acid and B12, and then the other is a variant which requires a very strong methylated form of B12. Now, interestingly enough here, what I wanted to suggest to you is that much of what we know about glutathione we know about through some of the very independent researchers who are working with autistic children, and have found that over 90% of them have some kind of defect in this MTHFR mutation, and that when given glutathione pushes and extra B12, many of these autistic children recover. So, the glutathione glitch, here's the advanced protocol. Many of you have a copy of my slides, so I'd like you to keep it for reference. There, of course, is your full spectrum minerals, your Epsom salt baths, which are very important in terms of relaxing the system and acting as a relaxant that not only helps the system to absorb other minerals better, but is involved with over 350 other cellular processes. In terms of the methylated B12, well, you can either take a shot or you can get an oral tablet of just the methylated, not the cyanocobalamin, but the methylated. And then there is a medication which is very good for diabetics. It's one that protects against diabetic neuropathy. It's known as Metnex, which interestingly enough has a methylated B12 and a methylated folic acid. So in terms of the action plan and what you're going to do at home to get rid of all of these toxins in the environment and make your body this superhuman fortress so that you can live through 2012 and what else is coming down the pike in terms of the EMFs, is practice, again, what I write about in electronic feng shui. I think what's important for you to do, more so than give up the cell phone, which nobody's going to do in this day and age, more so than even disable your wireless routers, the research seems to indicate that the cordless phones are more deleterious when it comes to affecting the body than either the wireless routers or your cell phones. So when it comes to the heart, and there are studies that have now shown this, cordless phones affect arrhythmia, affect the beating of the heart, and once you just remove the cordless phones and go retro, then we find that heart dysfunction is also balanced. I'd use your cell phone only when necessary. It's much better to text than to put something near your head. The closest it is to your head, the closer it is to your brain. I really would throw away your microwave because nutritionally it's killing all your enzymes. And every microwave that I've tested leaks, by the way. It leaks 15 to 20 feet from the source of the microwave oven. And it's leaking not because of the microwaves themselves, but because the hinges on the door have become loose. Don't live near high power lines. Now, this is really critical, or within 1/4 of a mile of a cell phone tower. That's when people get really sick. That's when children get leukemia. That's when chronic fatigue comes home to roost. That's when problems like multiple sclerosis, as well as this diabetes type 3, are also very evident. It's living very close to cell phone towers or antennas that are on an apartment building. Don't use wireless headsets, ladies and gentlemen. Use air tube headsets or put yourself on speaker instead. And then when it comes to the ionizing radiation, this is all non-ionizing but biologically impactful, I really would not go to great extent to get x-rays, at least if you can't help it, and certainly don't undergo CAT scans unless absolutely necessary. You're going to purify your indoor environment from molds and chemicals because we know that molds and chemicals can interreact with fungus, which is then fed by all that sugar that we're trying to give up in our diets. I'm a big believer that there's an inordinate amount you can do just naturally to clean up the indoor environment. You decorate with houseplants. Many of them just eat up formaldehyde. And you open your window when possible. Use a dehumidifier in damp rooms, especially basements, or even a multi-stage filtration unit that will effectively get rid of toxins and particles at 0.3 microns. In terms of cleaning up your home, you should only be using non-toxic cleaning products. I've given you a recipe here for hydrogen peroxide and vinegar that's been found to actually eliminate some of these nasty bacteria, from Salmonella to Shigella. I myself use a lot of vinegar in the house. I use it as a toilet bowl cleaner. I spray furniture polish with natural wax polish. All of these natural cleaning alternatives I do myself in my home. In terms of air fresheners, I love to use fragrant flowers or simmer herbs and spices. So there's an inordinate amount that you can do and should do to make sure that what you're breathing isn't festering and isn't feeding any of these agents that are living in your system. But most importantly of all, you must get the sugar out. Wouldn't you agree? So this little book was written, oh dear. This little book was written in 1996. Do you think it was ahead of its time? Well, that was the heyday of the, well, getting to be not the heyday. We were on the downswing of the high carbohydrate dietary model. You see, I was the nutrition director for the Pritikin Center, and I was telling everybody that was in front of me, just like I'm telling you here, but I was telling them something a little different. I was telling them they needed to eat a lot of carbohydrates to lose weight, and that their enemy was fat. Can you believe that? And now I'm telling you to eat fat, lose weight, and cut the sugar out. Now that's a much better message, wouldn't you agree? The reason I like this book is it's easy. I talk about all of the 60-some-odd illnesses that are connected to sugar, whether it is dementia, whether it's metabolic syndrome, whether it's problems with your heart, your skin, your nails, your joints, etc. And I give you delicious recipes as well that only use healthy sweeteners. I'm a big believer in local honey, by the way. I am not a big believer in agave, and I'm certain that somebody must have said something to you today about agave, which has been misrepresented in the health food industry. And I'm absolutely appalled when I go into health food stores in this day and time and see that dehydrated cane juice and its sister accomplices are on the ingredient list. It's amazing. Years ago, you could not go into a health food store, and I'm talking 20 years ago, when the first source of sugar was the second ingredient. I don't care how natural or how organic that was. So get the sugar out. We're going to be having these books at the back of the room. We're going to be giving you a very good show deal on these books, as a matter of fact, and I think you're going to enjoy it because we talk about getting the sugar out of your kitchen, out of soups and salads, party foods, baking desserts and treats, and then how to get the sugar out of your mind and out of your life with terrific resources, if I say so myself. Okay. Now, besides this book, here's the testing that I would demand. You know, you look at the hemoglobin A1C. I know you're all familiar with that. I would demand for all of your new clients that they do an insulin response test. Nobody's doing it anymore. It is essential. You need to do a fasting insulin and a fasting blood sugar to see whether a client is on their way to diabetes or is pre-diabetes or post-diabetes, and then make your protocols accordingly. I feel a lipid panel is also important. I am not a believer that high cholesterol is necessarily a bad thing. Actually, it could be lower than 250 and I'd be happy. So I just stuck the 220 up there. But I do think it's important that you measure the triglyceride to the HDL ratio, and then maybe your total cholesterol to HDL. But of all these tests, which one did I say was the most important? Insulin response. So I really want you to remember that, because nobody is demanding those. I demand them from a doctor. This is what I recommend to my clients, because I am the daughter of a type 2 diabetic. Type 2 diabetes was rampant in my family, so I'm going to change that paradigm. Here's what I take. Number one, you know you need a low glycemic, high fiber diet that has plenty of healthy, natural, saturated fats. You do know that, right? I know you know that, yes. Then you've got to maintain a healthy weight. Of course, we have a diet for that. It's called Fat Flush, but there's some wonderful other programs on the market that will get you to the same place. And then I think when it comes to special blood sugar lowering nutrients that will just give you a head start in terms of your immunity, many of these I know you're familiar with, from chromium to vanadyl sulfate to cinnamon, but the new one that you may not have heard about is berberine. Did anybody talk to you about the berberine connection? Well, there was a recent study that was promoted, I think it was published in Metabolism, and what it showed is that berberine at amounts of 500 milligrams taken 2 to 3 times a day had the same effectiveness as glucophage in regulation of glucose metabolism. How do you like that? You must get that study. This is very important. It was in Metabolism, May of 2008. So this very powerful plant alkaloid, which is highly regarded in Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine, by the way, is now is going to give all of the diabetic medications a run for their money, because this is just as effective in terms of glucose regulation. So I'm now in love with berberine. That's my #1 favorite. For more advanced treatment, we've got alpha lipoic acid, which I mentioned to you previously. This is a high amount, the 600 milligrams 3 times daily. It really is 200 milligrams 3 times daily. Too much alpha lipoic will lower blood sugar, so you always need to be taking additional B vitamins. Then we've got some special forms of thiamine, coenzyme Q10, which is exceedingly important in terms of the heart, and lutein, a very important carotenoid. In terms of cleaning up what's in your body, well, you're going to just get those foods that are organic, particularly if you are going to be eating a lot of apples, celery, or strawberries. These are the fruits and vegetables that are very highly sprayed. So these need to be organic. You do not want to be including 17 different fungicides, herbicides in your system. In addition to regulating blood sugar, you're going to be polluting your liver. So in terms of the dirty dozen, I think that's self-explanatory. But the other 15, which are fairly low in sugar, from your onions to your avocado, asparagus, sweet peas, eggplant, cabbage, sweet potatoes, grapefruit, and certainly mushrooms are the lowest in pesticides, do not have to be organic. What's in your body is important, particularly what goes in your kitchen. You're going to read labels like a food label detective. Get rid of those sugars. Get rid of all the artificial sweeteners. I'm not even crazy about stevia these days. Get rid of the flavorings. Get rid of the colorings. Anything that has MSG in any of its disguises. You know you've got to use glass, stainless steel, and get yourself a BPA-free plastic food storage container or a water bottle that's BPA-free, because we now know that BPA has a connection to diabetes. We know that it raises estradiol, which impacts glucose metabolism. I'm also a big believer in filtering your tap water, because you need to get rid of all of the radiation residues that have come to us thanks to Fukushima, parasites, bacteria, rust, dirt, and chlorine. Infrared saunas, I'm a big believer in infrared saunas to kind of sweat out the heavy metals and those nasty fat storage toxins. I love my detox bath formula #1. Whenever it rains or snows or you're exposed to radiation from a mammogram, in case you do take mammograms, if you live near a nuclear plant or at least 100 miles away, make note of my salt and soda bath. It'll be very effective at neutralizing some of the radioactive isotopes that can get into the air, get into the soil, and get into you. Here are 2 more detox baths that are part and parcel of my books. One is your food poisoning detox, which uses baking soda, believe it or not. And then there's the energy booster with good old-fashioned organic apple cider vinegar because it's so high in potassium, which is the cortisol mineral. Now, detoxification with oils. How many of you love coconut oil? Well, coconut oil is a good oil for this particular program because it kills off fungus in the body, and to 2 to 3 tablespoons a day, balanced with the EFAs, I would say go for it. It's also helpful to stimulate your liver and gallbladder, and I give you all the rules and protocols with a castor oil pack, and this is the time of year when you should do that because this is, after all, liver detox season. Now comes the most interesting of all, which is my detox for the entire system, which will help make your body a optimal healing internal sanctuary. This is where you do oil pulling, and you take about 2 teaspoons of oil, whatever oil you want. You could use your coconut oil, just make sure it liquefies at room temperature, or even sesame oil. You work the oil around in your mouth for 20 minutes. You push it, you pull it, you just want to get it through all the nooks and crannies, and before you know it, there's a lot of these little white bubbles from your saliva, from the aeration of these toxins that are in the mouth, and you'll be pulling bacteria from the gums and from the tubules of the teeth. Individuals who have done this, and this has been shown in certain double-blind tests, have actually reduced the amount of plaque in their mouths, and their gingivitis has improved, and their gum pockets have been reduced by 50%. All of that, by the way, is in Zapped. You're going to clean up, too, what's on your body, chemical-free body care products. Avoid products that contain triclosan. That's nasty antibacterial that's now making all the bacteria very resistant to antibiotics. And of course, we never mix antibacterial soaps, which we don't use anyways, with chlorinated tap water. And we now have filters that will take away the chlorine because we know it impacts the thyroid. So last but not least, we're going to open this up to questions. What I want to do is to bless your house. I want angels to guard its corners. I want gifts to fall upon it as snow falls upon a field. And let those within it share numberless passages of the sun and moon, and happiness fill them to overflowing. And may your home be free of mold, of sugar, of toxins, of chemicals, and electromagnetic radiation. And on that note, I want to thank you very much for being such a stellar audience. Do we have questions? I can't even see. Sorry, these lights, I can't even see.
Okay. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I've been helped by several of your books in the past. And I just wanted to ask you if you could speak for a moment about earthing. Because I started earthing about 8 or 9 months ago using equipment, including some that I purchased from your site, and it has changed my life very much for the better.
Oh, I love it. Earthing reflects the ability to connect directly into the earth, which normalizes many of the EMF frequencies that are affecting your buildup of body electricity. And it does that by bringing in and infusing your body with negative electrons that can tamp down the free radicals. People that earth, and I'm one of them, I measure everything using my meters and so forth, but I go to sleep using a wristband, which I will show you, and that we do sell on my site, which is ruzapped.com. And this will connect either into the electrical ground, or you can connect this directly into the ground with a grounding rod, and you will find a marvelous calming of the nervous system. Your melatonin levels become normalized and neutralized, and your cortisol levels become normalized and neutralized, and this is based on some of the double-blind studies that we've done. Individuals that have MS, individuals that have had organ transplants, that have aches and pains and arthritis, will get a variety variety of the bands, sleep in them, and their pain will absolutely be drained from their system. It's almost life-changing, and I will say that as well.
Is there any other like personal devices that you recommend or websites? Like, I don't know if you've heard of some of the stones they have on the market to prevent just for personal everyday use, going to work, going back home.
You know, I've heard about them, but they just haven't been vetted in the proper double-blind placebo-controlled studies, to be honest with you. I use earthing as my protective device. I use the filters in the home. When I go out to a motel or hotel, I use my little filtration. I bring some of them there. And then the other things that I do is I use a special pad on the iPhone, which I don't use, but I have this protective device, and I want you to look it up. It's called the Pong, P-O-N-G. Now, P-O-N-G, Pong, the Pong, is this sleek little cover that you can put on your iPhones. Now, I'm not sure if it's every iPhone, but there's certain iPhones, and it will stop the EMFs from coming at you. It will be reflected back to the tower. So it stops the specific absorption rate of the radiation. And that's the best I can give you, because I know you're going to be using your iPhones. So the Pong could be very helpful. Now, they also have larger Pongs for the iPads. So go on there and see what you can find. That's just about what I think is helpful. There are lots of little gadgets that have been embedded with frequencies. I mean, how effective they are, just anybody knows.
Yeah, I have a question. I started using these about 2 years ago, the microsurge meter to measure the frequencies you're talking about, these things that pull it out. But I did a test before I even got these by sleeping in the middle of my living room, and I had 3 straight nights where I was dreaming, and that sold me before I even got these. I found the highest reading I've ever found in my public library, where these nice soft chairs are lined up and people sit to read, some of the most smartest people in the community. But there's an issue that I face. I mean, this is a scary thing, and I'm just wondering how you deal with that factor, because some people, if they're scared, they don't have the income to even approach this kind of thing. How do you deal with that? I mean, because it's obviously around us.
Expensive, yeah. You know what you can do, and I guide you through it in the book, but you can get a transistor radio, and if you get a cheapy little transistor radio, which I'm sure we can all find or have for emergency purposes, put it on something like 500 AM, and you'll get some static at that particular frequency, and bring it around the house. And if you bring it near any area that has an electric field, it's going to make a noise, and you will know that the motor from your refrigerator is giving off a certain frequency, and you will know where to place your dining room table in relationship to that motor. Or you'll know that where you put your head and try to sleep, there's a lot of electrical interference, so you'll move the bed 3 feet, if you can, from the wall. That's what I would do. That's a cheap way of doing it, and it can be just as effective. This little transistor radio will make a noise with anything that has an electrical field. One of the things I found in my house, because my whole house, I had to get it all mitigated, because if I wrote a book, I had to walk the walk and talk the talk. You'll see that's what I do. And the dimmer lights that we had kept making this terrible sound, so we replaced the dimmer lights, dimmer switches. It's a real source of dirty electricity, as are those ridiculous compact fluorescent lights. I mean, I have no idea why they've got compact fluorescent lights and they're shoving them down everybody's throat. Number one, major source of dirty electricity. Number two, UV radiation. And number three, they're loaded with mercury. So what happens if you break them? So, yes, you got to start, and the government isn't going to do anything. Do you know why? Because, yeah, there's a lot, the $1 trillion, over $1 trillion from the 20 telecommunications companies I think I told you about. The government makes a lot of money on cell phone minutes, from what I understand. And they're simply not going to do anything. And there was a law that was written into the books in looking in my mind's eye now, it was 1996. It was a rider to the Telecommunications Act. You cannot even complain about the siting of a cell phone tower or antenna on health purposes. They got that already predisposed. And the other thing they're doing is they got this rollout now of these very strong towers. They're called WiMAX towers. You will be seeing such an uptick of problems in terms of kids and their heartbeats and what's going on in schools. With all the Wi-Fi in schools, they now have defibrillators for children because it affects their heart. So I'm telling you, this is not just the little canaries and the crazy environmental people out there like me that are, making such a hoop-de-doo about it. There are lots of people that are very environmentally sensitive. It's making them sick. In Sweden, they recognize this as a disease. They call it a functional impairment, and we've got to get to that point here. I am organizing a national conference, so for those of you that want more information about that, I'm going to have the best scientists in the world at this conference. It's going to be in October in D.C., right around sort of the election time. See who we can get on either side to sort of support us. But if you're interested, I want you to keep touch with me on AnnLouise.com, which is my site, AnnLouise.com. We have blogs, we have videos, and you can become an activist, because we need them. It's not just about the diet, and it's not just about supplements, and it's not just about lifestyle anymore. The environment is very toxic. What a positive comment to make. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you for the great information. I'm curious about the oiling. I've been doing it, and it seems to work, and people are asking me, why does it work? And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why it actually works.
It's supposed to work because the bacteria has a kind of a fatty membrane, and oil attracts oil. And so it then pulls the oil from, the oil acts as a medium to pull the bacteria where it may be hiding in the gums or surrounding leaking root canals or in the tubules itself of the teeth that may be having some decay, and then it can get rid of it that way. You'll pull from your sinuses, you're going to pull from your throat, and people say that their dark spots in their hands go away. It's a big anti-aging therapy as well. And it's been around in Ayurvedic medicine for centuries. The interesting thing is it doesn't matter what the oil is as long as it's an oil, and it could be even a refined oil. It's the viscousness and slipperiness of the oil that attaches to the slipperiness of the cell membrane of the bacteria.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was curious about two things. Have you heard much about people using sea salt in their water to help against electromagnetic fields because of how it helps with the cells?
Using sea salt as?
Adding it to the water they drink?
Well, when minerals and water make you more electrical, so it would actually be a vehicle that would be very helpful. I'm a big believer in salt, so I think that's probably very helpful for other reasons. We believe in doing the salt and soda baths, which will actually draw out and neutralize some of the radioactive isotopes and replace it with natural minerals. So yes, I would think that that would be very healthy.
Okay. And then one other thing, can you give a few examples of what you're referring to when you were saying if someone isn't detoxing because they're not making glutathione, and you were saying, maybe for us or a client, what that might look like?
Yes, it's an individual whose skin breaks out all the time. It's an individual who is not eliminating 2 or 3 times a day. An individual that's unusually sensitive or allergic to various supplements or herbs or foods. Primarily, I would look at the skin as being a vehicle, almost like a third kidney, because the liver is not able to process properly.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
And taking that test could be life-saving for some of them. And again, it's not expensive. It's essential if you're autistic. I mean, if you know somebody that's autistic. The other thing I didn't tell you about autism, which I think I'd like to tell you, because it will blow your mind, is that one of the researchers who is an award-winning New York Times journalist suggested that the enormous amount of Doppler ultrasounds that we are giving to our pregnant women, think about it, may have something to do with a rise in autism. So I'm just putting that out to you. And I will tell you one other thing about autism, because I know it's a topic that has got to be near and dear to your hearts. But there is also an indication that it was the children's Tylenol that they used to give after a series of the vaccination shots. and the fact that that Tylenol would impact the liver so that the liver could not detoxify appropriately the mercury that was part of the vaccination. So now they think there's a big paper that's being written about that, by the way. So the whole idea here is the liver detoxification, no children's Tylenol for the kids, no, no, no. And if in fact there is some abnormality going on, taking the test could be life-saving. It's a lot to think about, isn't it?
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much for all that wonderful information. I have a question about hybrid cars.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
I can sit down now. That was my question.
Oh,
Yeah. They're loaded, particularly, yeah, if you take a meter, any of there are lots of meters that are on the market. They're tri-field meters and even more expensive ones that can measure high amounts of radio frequency and so forth. You'll find that they are very toxic.
yes, I had an experience. I bought a hybrid car, and I was driving from Canada to Washington, and at the border, the patrol person there had some kind of a Geiger counter, and he
Oh my God.
he asked us if any of us had recently had an X-ray, and we said no, and we asked why, and he said his meter was picking up a lot of radiation. And I went home and did a lot of research on hybrid cars and electromagnetic field and radiation, and promptly sold my car, or got rid of my car.
It's not, I know it. You know, green is not necessarily healthy.
Yes.
And thank you. No, that's very
Thank you.
that's very true. That's very true. And I was going to tell you one other thing too, which you'll find interesting. Of course, it just went out of my brain. I'll figure it out. Oh, one of the most unhealthy places for you to ever be is in an airplane. And do you know why? Because it's Wi-Fi consistently. You're up in that air and you are in a metal tube, and that metal it's reflecting and intensifying all the radiation. And someday they're going to look back and say, remember how silly we were when we did all those tanning beds years ago? Well, look at what we did 20 years later. We're in this little metal tube, and we're just kind of frying ourselves, because that's what happens. You got the radiation, you know, from radar. You got the gamma rays coming to you, and now you got the electromagnetic from the microwaves. More positive information. I'm just loaded with it today.
Could you please say a little more about the ultrasound, some of the sites for that, or?
Yes, it was something.
Studies.
It was something that was written. It needs more study, but the work is from Blake Levitt. Blake Levitt, the award-winning New York Times journalist, who wrote about it, and wrote about it in a chapter in her book, which of course I reference in Zapped. She's a marvelous environmentalist. I mean, you just love what she has to write about, and she talks about that and actually gives you a very defined scientific reason behind that in terms of what happens to the amniotic fluid. And it has to do with the release of these stress proteins that I was talking about.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering if the power strips that are made specifically when you plug in your TV or something and then you use your remote to turn it off, and they cut off the electricity from the device that you're using, does that offer any protection from the magnetic fields?
Sometimes yes and sometimes not. You have to measure them, but what I do with all my power strips is every power strip has one of these in there.
Okay.
And that's what I use.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was wondering if there's any danger of exposure to dirty electricity through the various earthing products, and are you
that's a
plugging
good
it
question.
into a filter when you use one?
No, that is a very good question, because there's currently a lot of dissension about that out there. The question was, we're talking about earthing and the fact that you're grounding yourself to the free antioxidants that are coming through you from the earth. But on the other hand, a lot of the dirty electricity sometimes can generate ground current, when the neutral line becomes so overloaded that the electricity kind of jumps and goes into the ground and back to the substation. And they're using the ground instead of the neutral line as almost a current. So the question is, can you harm yourself if you're earthing, if in fact there is dirty electricity? I believe you probably can, which is why you've got to go to as pristine an area as you can, not live near a lot of, not live at the end of a power line per se, because it's really at the end of the line where all these transformers seem to get blown, and you'll have to test accordingly.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Hi. Hi. Oh, sorry, go ahead. My husband's a telecommunications engineer, and he had the Dirty Electricity book and was reading it, and when I was ordering something online, I bought him your book, and he should be a rep for earthing. He's sold a lot to, people in our church and things. But one of the things I want to ask you about is that he took our laptops and he made aluminum foil covered cardboard to put underneath our laptops. And then when he tested my sister-in-law's house, both of them have cancer, they have that smart thing on their house.
The smart meter.
Absolutely no idea that the smart meter was there, and it was amazing how high the EMFs went. And so what they did is they put a strip of aluminum foil along that wall. So could you explain how that works and why you put the aluminum foil there?
The aluminum foil deflects. It's almost like a deflector of the electricity or the negative frequencies. Think of it as like that little pong case that deflects the specific absorption rate of the radiation when you put it around your cell phone case, and it can deflect it. And it's making it into what they call a Faraday cage so that you're very protected. I know people that have put aluminum foil around their entire rooms so that whatever's coming in from their neighbor's place or from cell phone towers that are grouped together or too many antennas, it just deflects it out. So that's an easy way to protect yourself.
Hi, would you comment on mammograms?
On mammograms?
Mm-hmm.
I don't take them. A. B, I think you can get pretty accurate information from thermography, from breast thermography.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's what I would do. All of these things are very, very individual. And the idea is that presenting something like this about Zapped is just designed to open up your mind to a greater awareness that there is so much going on in this day and time that may be a lot more than just lifestyle changes, maybe more than exercise, willpower, what's in your diet, what should be in your diet, what is in your diet, and that the environment is a factor that needs to be considered, particularly when you're doing an intake form with your clients. One of the things that I would always do in your intake form is find out, number one, if they're sleeping over their wireless router. Many of the people that I work with, they sleep over their wireless router, so all that is coming up and affecting their backs, their spines, their pains, their aches, this, that, and the other. You want to make sure that there's no corded phone in the house. There is a corded phone, no cordless phones. Cordless, according to the Europeans, is like having a mini cell phone tower in the privacy of your own home. Cordless constantly transmits an energy, whether it's on or off. So cordless is worse, 10 times worse than your little cell phone, because most of you are just texting now. You're not really talking and putting that little microwave up to your brain. I would get rid of that, get a corded phone, which, could become a dinosaur soon, but I certainly would do that. And I would also not use your phones in the car, because as you are using your cell phone in the car, it constantly has to be amping up the power to go to another tower. If you use your cell phone at all, it has to be fully powered, fully fueled, because if it's got low bars, it needs to amp up again, which means more radiation. So there are lots of little things you can do, and then you just have to not give any iPhones to your children, because, you're going to like this, because we have now 75% of our children between the ages of 8 and 18 all have they've got smartphones. They have smartphones. And the Europeans have found that a child's skull, until the age of 18 is still developing, as is his nervous system, and their skulls are thinner. Their brains are closer to the top of the skull, so that the radiation penetrates 50% more. So, you just have to read my book, number one. Just read it. Even if you get it just for the section on children, and do it for your children's sake. That's really what I'm concerned about. They now have wire-free zones in Europe. There's a whole town, as a matter of fact, in Spain that is electromagnetically free. So they're doing that. We're going to have wire-free zones. There should be hotspots that are wire-free. And whatever you do, the thing that you need to check on the most, besides getting rid of the cordless phone and getting a corded phone back into the house, the other thing you need to do is make sure that if you have a smart meter, you can opt out of those programs. You can opt out of those smart meters and just get the old-fashioned analog meter, because that's where people are getting sick. They're getting very sick with the smart meters. That's why this whole thing is now blowing up. That's the real reason they wanted me on Fox News last night, because of the smart meter problem. Last but not least, any last questions before I want to give you something really positive to think about.
Thanks for talking about the smart meter. I just got a thing in the mail that they wanted to put one in my house.
Well, if you opt out.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Because,
Yeah, I'm going to. I have a question about kids. So
Yes.
when they're traveling on the airplane, or you feel like they've been exposed, I'm talking about little kids, that would be my first question. Is there something that you can do to protect them? And what about crystals and magnets and things like that?
You know what I would do? I'd get those little Pong cases, because there's actually some research on those Pong cases, and I don't represent them at all. I just think it'd be really helpful. I'd get the little Pong case. I think they have them for children in different colors and that kind of a thing. That helps with a specific absorption, the SAR. The other thing you do with children is you just have to reduce their usage of. Most of these kids text a lot anyways, which is kind of a blessing. But yeah, I know. Okay. I think in the house, make sure that their bedrooms are as wireless and wired free as possible. Just make sure that their bedrooms are a healing haven. That's what I would do. Shut off the electricity at night if you can. You probably can't with a child. Make sure you don't have a wireless baby monitor. Get it wired if you're going to use one like that. Wired is always better than wireless. And make sure that the baby's head is, at least 6 feet away from any gadget that may or may not be plugged in.
Great, thank you.
That's what you have to do. Is that it? So let me just thank you for everything. And let me just say one thing, and that is that health, I believe, is a gift. Health is one of the greatest gifts to mankind. And health is that which many of us use up for the first 60 years of our lives in order to gain wealth, after which we use up of all the wealth to try and recapture our lost health. So I'm hoping that whole paradigm change is going to shift, because people like you at the Nutritional Therapy Association are going to go out there and be advocates and do the right thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann Louise. That was wonderful, as always. So, one little comment, one thing Dietrich Klinghardt told me he did a lecture is when he goes to bed at night, he gets up, he goes to the master switch in his house, and he just turns the whole dang house off, so just another solution. And he said he slept so much better after that, because trying to micromanage all this can be a little bit crazy. But
he's right.
Just make sure your freezer's already cranked up, because you don't have melting stuff in the morning. So anyway, that was wonderful. I want another really big warm hand for Ann Louise.
Thank you.
What a gift. She really is one of the leaders. And I noticed after you stopped talking, I saw a bunch of people get up. I go, where are they going? They were all going back over the corner to buy your book. so I think you did really well on that. Also, Jill Escher asked me to make a quick announcement. So many of you weren't able to get her book, but anybody that wants to buy it in the quantities, I think of 10 or more, she said just contact her on her Gmail. It's jill.escher@gmail.com. If you just want 1 or 2 copies, just go to Amazon, because she can't really beat that price. But if you want to buy wholesale, she wanted to make those available to you, and so I think that gives us good. you know what? Because we believe in eating in a parasympathetic model, so we have almost a full 2 hours for lunch today, give you a chance to meet with the vendors, have a relaxed meal, maybe take a little nap, and so try and be back about 5 minutes to 3, and we'll get started with Dr. Alex Vasquez. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.